I don't think it has really sunk in for me yet that here we are at 300 episodes. 300 episodes! If someone told me 5 years ago that I would hit 300 episodes, I think I would have just given them a blank stare. Not because I didn't think it was possible, but because 300 episodes seemed so far away. But here we are. And I want you to know that this milestone is not mine. It's ours. Because every download, every listen, every time that you have shared this show or left a review, that's you making what I do here possible. So today I'm going to share the biggest lessons, the hardest mistakes, some of the most embarrassing moments that I have had in my podcasting journey that I didn't see coming. But my hope is that this episode helps to guide you as you look ahead and to set your own goals for your podcast. Because as you will come to realize at some point in your podcasting journey, the real gift isn't what your podcast can do for you. It's the lessons that it gives you along the way. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. I will be totally honest with you, podcasting is hard freaking work. I used to be afraid to say that to people because I was like, oh my gosh, if they think it's too hard of work, they're not going to join my program and blah, blah, blah. And I actually had a mentor of mine tell me as much at one point. I had written an entire piece of copy for a Facebook ad, and the gist of it was basically like, this is hard. And he was like, wait a minute, you don't want people to think they're hard. They're not going to buy your program, right? You don't want to scare them out of doing it. And I'm like, yeah, but at the same time, if someone had told me how hard it would be, how much personal growth I would have to do along the way, I probably wouldn't have started this show. 5 years ago, when I started this podcast, I had a baby at home with me full time. I had spit up on my shirt most days. I was not camera ready. I had only a couple of hours a day to work. And here I was taking on a podcast. Now, I originally started it thinking, well, this is going to make my marketing so much easier, which is going to make my business so much easier. And it's going to make my life so much easier. And it has made my life easier. It has made my marketing easier, but not without dedication, not without intentionality, not without fully stepping into the role as a podcast host and owning that and staying committed, not only to you, my listener, but to myself as well, which I'll share more about in a moment. So if anyone has ever tried to tell you that podcasting is easy, run, because they're trying to sell you something. I had a new client who messaged me and they were like, okay, how quickly can we get to these numbers and this many leads coming in from our podcast? And I was just honest with them. I said, look, if we are to work together, here's what you need to know. A podcast is not a magic fix. But it is a very, very powerful tool when it's fully integrated into your marketing funnel and done the right way. And they were like, thank you. We appreciate that. That is totally reasonable. And we absolutely want to work with you. So here's the thing. Many people tend to assume that the hard work is over once they hit publish, but it's not. Just like any other marketing channel, I don't care if it's short form content, if it's email marketing, if it's YouTube, if it's running ads, attracting new daily listeners to your podcast requires consistent effort, no different than any other marketing channel. You cannot just create an Instagram profile and hope that by doing nothing more beyond that, you wake up with 100,000 followers tomorrow. We all know it doesn't work that way. Yet in podcasting, there is this idea that's been perpetuated through the years that as long as you build the podcast, well, guess what? People are going to naturally flock to it. And this is why we see a lot of hosts who create shows that have great content, that have a great concept in mind, that have the intention to reach audiences and to help people. And we see them fail. We see them fade into obscurity because they thought that hitting publish was going to be the thing that grew the podcast. Yes, they know it takes consistent effort, but what they didn't realize was that it doesn't just take consistent effort in terms of showing up and creating content. It takes consistent effort to get your podcast in front of new listeners every day. And that was one of the biggest surprises for me. That was one of the biggest lessons for me because I used to think that consistency just meant hitting publish every week. And gosh darn it, was I consistent. But podcasting taught me that consistency also means consistently promoting your show. And it means showing up authentically, consistently, especially when it's hard. I'm not going to lie to you. There have been times when I just don't want to create episodes. Every single month, when I sit down to batch the upcoming month's episodes, I procrastinate. There are things that I do to not have to hit the record button. You would think it wouldn't still happen after 300 episodes in 5 years, but I'm here to tell you right now, no differently than Frank Sinatra throwing up on stage before he would go do a performance, I still get the jitters before I hit record. And I have to take a breath and I have to take a beat and I have to just say, Courtney, trust yourself. Trust the words that are going to come out of your mouth. Trust that they will help people. Trust that the people who need to hear whatever it is that you have to share is going to hear it. And it's going to matter to them. And it's going to make a difference for them. In the episode right before this one, I shared how I've been in a really weird season in my business of burnout. I have a very high tolerance for pain. And so I have a very high tolerance for stress. But when I hit that wall, man, it really affects my creativity. And it really affects my energy. If you follow me on any social media channel, this is why I haven't been active on social media at all lately. But I've never missed a week of publishing an episode here on the podcast. And that's because of you. You here listening each week, that's what keeps me going. That's what keeps me showing up. It has kept me here every week for the last 5 years. This show would not exist without you. And for that, I am so deeply grateful. Something else that surprised me about podcasting is how in my head I can get about the content that I share here on the show. And you hear me talk all the time about marketing and positioning and why it's so important. And I really seek to show you that through the work that I do here on the show, to live by example, to be different, to give you something that you can't get anywhere else. But sometimes it is a lot easier said than done coming up with fresh ideas. Also, I call it the curse of the expert. Sometimes we just get bored with talking about our topic over and over again. I mean, if you have been doing your work for any length of time in the world, chances are you felt that way too, where it's like, oh, I'm out of fresh ideas. I don't have anything different to offer this week. I don't have anything new. And yet I don't want to talk about the same thing that I've talked about 12 times already here on the show. And so there is a personal game that I play with myself called How Many Episodes Can I Create Without Repurposing Anything? Which is a very tall order when you've got a 2 times weekly release schedule. But this is the power of a focused topic. And this is the takeaway for you. I got an email just this week from someone whose show isn't growing, and she's looking for guidance. But she said to me, her words, my podcast is intentionally eclectic, and I like it that way. That's fine. We can work with that. Because a lot of people think that niching down on their podcast means limiting themselves to one topic. It doesn't. It doesn't. What niching does is it makes you hyper relevant. Inside of our mentorship program, Pod Launch, we teach niching differently than you've probably ever heard it taught before. In fact, we've had clients who've been in the marketing world for years, and they said, never have I ever thought about it this way. Because when you niche in a particular way, not only does it open you up to have tons of topics that you could explore, that so many that you will never run out of talking about things, it also makes you hyper relevant to the person that you're here to serve. And that level of differentiation is what you need if you want to 10x your podcast growth. So when I rebranded this podcast to the show that you know today, part of me was excited. The other part of me was afraid. Because when I sit down to plan episodes, I look at every set of 8 episodes that I batch once a month. It's kind of like a mountain, and I have to climb that mountain over and over again every single month. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to come up with more topics and more things to talk about that I haven't already touched on? And yet, I do. And that right there is the counterintuitive benefit of having a specific focus for your podcast, where you become known for something, where you deepen and develop that relationship with your listeners, or rather your listeners with you, because they know you for something. They know you as the expert in a given thing, and they trust you more because of it. It's no different than going to a general practitioner versus a cardiac thoracic specialist when that's really what you need. You're going to trust their opinions so much more because they know their subject matter so much more. But let me ask you this. What differentiates 2 specialists? That is the level that we need to go to with your podcast. Being a specialist isn't enough. Being a specialist and showing people why you are the specialist for them is what gets people to click play. I didn't know this when I started my podcast. I learned this the very hard way. So hear me when I say that niching doesn't mean being so narrow that you can only talk about one thing. Early on, though, one of my biggest mistakes was that I focused so much on trying to please everyone with my content. My downloads plateaued because my episodes weren't speaking to a specific audience. And it was really hard. I kept being like, oh my gosh, it's so hard to get clear. It's so hard to get clarity. And every expert out there and every mentor that I ever had was like, you need to get clear. You need to get clarity. And I'm like, I can't. It's hard. And it was because I hadn't refined my message enough. And more importantly, I hadn't refined who my ideal listener was to be able to craft every episode to address their unique pain points, your pain points. When I did that, when I rebranded this show to do that, when I actually narrowed my focus, I was afraid because I saw a dip in downloads. I expected that dip. I did. I knew there was going to be some attrition, but it still scared me because I was like, did I make the right call? Did I just make a huge mistake? Now, I knew enough to know that I needed to stick with it long enough to see a result one way or another. I couldn't judge based on those early numbers. Now, we have higher monthly downloads than we have ever had previously in the history of the show. We're seeing up to 32% month-over-month growth without ads. So here's what you can take away from this. If you're not seeing growth with your podcast right now, ask yourself, who am I trying to reach? Who specifically? And am I creating content for them, or am I creating it for anyone who will listen? This is an important question, and I encourage you to get quiet to think about this. So often we just want to move quickly. We want to check boxes. We want to feel like we're progressing. We want to make that progress and we want to feel like we're accomplishing something, that we don't slow down to ask ourselves the hard questions. But when we do that, the answers become clear and then the progress becomes inevitable. The journey becomes easy. Are you creating content for the specific person that you're trying to reach? Or right now, are you watering down your message in any way to try to reach anyone who will listen? Another thing that I learned about the podcast that totally came out of left field that I did not expect, never in a million years would have thought that this would have been something that I got out of the process of podcasting. It was the self-growth that has happened over the 5 years that I've been podcasting that I attribute largely to the fact that I've been podcasting. If you're new to my world, you might not know this, but in my mid-20s, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. And the biggest risk of that surgery and having my thyroid removed was that I could permanently lose my voice. What you might not know is that around the age of 9 years old, I was repeatedly told that my mouth is what got me into trouble. I was punished for speaking up. I was hurt emotionally and physically when I would speak up. And so I learned not to speak up because that was the one thing that always seemed to cause pain in my life. So for the better part of 20 years, I swallowed my voice. I swallowed my thoughts. I wouldn't share. I'll never forget the one C that I got in college. The one C that brought my grade point average down just enough to graduate magna cum laude and not summa cum laude. Okay, I'm not bitter about it. But the one C was because my professor would not adjust my grade because I didn't participate enough in class. Had I spoken up just a little bit more, he would have given me the B instead of the C because it was right there. It was on the cusp. And I was in his office petitioning, hey, I feel like I deserve this B. And he didn't think I did. But I'm grateful that that happened because I look at it now as a map dot on my journey to fully owning and fully using my voice. And so podcasting is a commitment to you as much as it is to me. Showing up every week is a commitment to myself to use my voice that God allowed me, that He gave back to me, to use it to give Him in what little way I can, to help and to serve and to create what I hope is meaningful change in others' lives and in the world. The extension that this has had in my life is that it has taught me how to set better boundaries, to do less people pleasing, to be much clearer in my communication, to say what I think, to speak up at ease in certain relationships that I have where previously I would have never shared how I really felt and then later resented it. And it's this platform that was the catalyst for that gift. And so throughout this process, even though I resist hitting record sometimes, even though I still get those jitters, deep down, I truly enjoy the process of podcasting. And I didn't realize it till I really sat down to plan this episode, how important this is, loving the process of podcasting. That's what's going to keep you going. That's what's going to keep you going through the hard times. If you don't fully love the process of podcasting, either find out how to love it or find something else. And if the answer is something else, that's okay. The other day I had someone on a call and she was really torn between keeping her podcast or letting it go. She had a 30-year career in radio, very successful. She had her podcast for pretty much as long as podcasts have been around, but the podcast wasn't giving her anything. It wasn't doing anything for her. And I said, look, as I see it, you have two options. You can keep going the route of podcasting, but we're going to really need to double down and get specific on what makes you different, on why your listeners should listen. We're going to need to create a clear plan for the podcast so that it can give you the results that you want it to give you. Or you can go the other direction. You can rest on your laurels knowing that you have done good work in the world, and that if radio is your first love, which she told me it was, that it's okay to focus on what you love the most. So I urge you to find out how to fall in love with the process of podcasting, because if you don't, it's going to be very hard to keep going. And if you don't love the process, if you genuinely don't love the process, that's okay. Find something else that you love and do that. You know, I never really expected the podcast to grow my business in the way that it has. I mean, I hoped that it would, but I never really expected the impact that it would have. And there are moments where I realize what I've done to myself in signing up for a podcast, where there's no breaks. I'm going to be doing this into the indefinite future. It is not always glamorous. I am literally standing in a pajama shirt right now with no makeup on and greasy hair recording this episode for you. And that's partly why I podcast, because if you saw how I looked on an average day working behind my desk, you probably wouldn't tune into my YouTube channel. But then I get messages like this. I just have to take a minute to express my deep gratitude to Courtney for creating this amazing program. I am celebrating 10,000 downloads on my podcast today in less than a year because of this program. Because this took a totally clueless, newbie, wannabe podcaster by the hand and showed me exactly what to do, step by step. And I will be forever grateful to you, Courtney, for creating such a thoughtful, thorough, powerful program. The extended impact that you are making spans far and wide through your students. You equip us with what we need to make the wider impact that we wish to make. You are a gem. And P.S., I've been a top 100 ranking podcast since day one for 9 straight months now. I don't even know how I feel when I get messages like this, because part of me, it's just that instant validation that the work I am doing matters, that the work that I do here matters, even if the impact is not as great as I want it to be yet. But then the other part of me, the part of me that's hard on myself, the part of me that is always, oh yes, but are you doing enough? Wonders, am I doing enough? Is there something that I did or didn't do that would have helped her more? And just totally transparent with you, that is a big part of what I'm working on right now in my own personal journey of accepting that the work I do does matter, that the work I do is enough, and that it is helping people. I think this is something we can all examine in our lives. So much of my business, so much of my life, so much of what exists now in my world has become possible through my podcast. I wouldn't be speaking on the industry's biggest stages without my podcast. I would never have been invited to be a judge for the Webby Awards, which for those of you that don't know is like the Grammys of the internet, and collaborate with some of the most notable companies in the online space and in the podcasting industry. Over 80 to 90% of the people who I sit down on calls with to learn about pod launch have mentioned the podcast as one of the main reasons why they're here. None of it would be possible without my show or my team, who helps me take care of each and every one of our students inside of our pod launch community and to protect my time so that I can stay focused to create this resource for you. And if you've had a podcast for any length of time, maybe you'll relate to this too, is that we often get into podcasting for one thing. And sometimes people realize it's not their thing. That's okay. But for those of us who it is our thing, it gives you more and it teaches you more than you ever could have imagined. So if you're podcasting right now and you're not getting the results that you want, let's talk. Go to the show notes, book a call. I want to help. Because in the new year, we're going to be introducing a new offer, which is perfect for you if maybe you don't want to jump into our 6-month mentorship just yet, but you are looking for deeper guidance from me on your specific podcast, then you can get here on the show. And if you're listening to this right now as my gift to you, I am giving the first person who signs up for one of these deeper consultation calls a full scholarship, where typically this is a $500 value. But if you're the first person to sign up for that, you'll get it for free. Because if you aren't where you want to be yet with your podcast, know this, okay? And this is going to sound crazy, but I'm not where I want to be yet with mine. It's been 5 years. I look at those 5 years and I think, gosh, I wanted to grow so much faster. I wanted to do so much more. I thought I'd be further along than where I am right now. And that might sound so silly after hearing all the things that my podcast has done for me and the impact that it's having in the world. But I'm the type of person who struggles to accept my wins and to share them, because every win that I have sets the bar higher. So if this is you and you're not where you want to be yet with your podcast, even though you can look back and see your progress along the way, or if you're listening and you listen to the show because you want to embark on your podcasting journey, but you want it to be successful, I thought it would be helpful to share some of the goals that I'm setting for myself this year with my podcast and to invite you to set your own goals alongside me. Even if you're listening to this at a later time, you can still set these goals, okay? This episode is airing at the beginning of the year, but this is not something you have to do at the start of a new year. In fact, unless the new year is like a few days away, like it is if you're listening to this in real time, waiting for a new year to start only delays you achieving your goals by that many more months. For example, if it's June, don't be like, okay, well, I'll come back to this in January because, well, you could have had 6 months of head start. The two questions that have guided my own personal goal setting. First of all, what's one thing that you want to do differently in the new year? You personally. And number two, what is one way that you'll show up for your listeners in the year ahead? Something I'm doing work on right now, which you've heard me mention here on the show recently, is to do the deep work to heal the root cause of my own burnout patterns. This is something I've resisted for a long time because it's going to require an identity shift, and it's scary, and it is hard, and it's requiring a lot of energy, but it is something that I want. It's something that I'm ready for, and so it's something that I'm committed to doing differently in the new year. And as far as the podcast is concerned, I really had to think about this one because truthfully, things are going well with the show. I have nothing to complain about. But that is also why I'm setting the goal to optimize further behind the scenes. I want to get more granular with tracking exactly how this podcast is impacting the growth of our company. Right now, we're kind of sort of tracking attribution, but I really want to double down on the podcast funnel in the same way that we've optimized our sales funnels. So to improve on what's working, but ultimately be able to figure out how to best teach our clients to do the same thing. So here's my challenge to you. First, think about what's one way that you're going to show up for your audience this year. And what's one thing that you want to do differently in the year ahead. And let that guide your actions over the next 90 days. And then evaluate, tweak, and repeat. That's the name of the game. We work, we stop, we evaluate, we tweak, and then we repeat. We don't work, as I am learning. As I mentioned, I'm working on my burnout patterns. So whether you're here for the first time, or whether you have been listening since episode 1, please know this show exists because of you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for making 300 episodes possible. Because every time that you hit play, you're making this show a reality. You're making this show possible. You're keeping me going. And if this show has impacted you in any way, shape, or form, I would love it if you would just take 30 seconds, tap the 5 stars, or better yet, on Apple, leave a review. And let me know how this show has impacted you or is impacting you. Because every episode that I create is truly my way of saying thank you for being here. Because I wouldn't be here without you. And if you do love this show, then stick around because in the next episode, we're going to be talking about how to get your listeners talking back. I've got a special guest joining me to show you why podcast listeners tend to be so passive and some of the things that you can start doing inside of your episodes to get your listeners engaging with your content, to get them leaving reviews, to get them taking you up on your calls to actions and actually sharing their feedback on your show. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy. All the answers, Okay. It's a question I get a lot and that we haven't dived deep into here on the podcast. And guess what? Well, hold on a minute. Where am I going with my notes? I was at a podcasting event. Courtney, you're talking faster than your mouth can move. Slow it down.